Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to walking through this presentation and explaining how cash proffers work in Loudoun County. You have this packet in front of you, and I would ask if you could draw your attention to it. We'll work page by page, and if you have particular concerns or questions about any issues as they relate to jurisdictions you're from, or questions in general, I will be glad to take those as we get to the end. The general topic of planning and zoning and paying for growth can be a little dry at times, but for the most part, it is about dealing with people, and you'll see that we in Loudoun have seen quite an influx in the number of people and the increased population that we have dealt with over time. I'm going to work through that. It's about money and how you pay for growth and who bears the burden of that particular cost, what that means to people. It's about providing services, local government services to the populations that we have within our jurisdiction. And it's also about managing expectations for the people that come to our community and are looking for public services. Where are they? I thought it was over there. Where's the school? I've got kids. What's the deal here? And engaging with stakeholders all throughout the process, whether that's the builder, the builder's attorney, the staff people that need to build public facilities, and the citizens who are looking to get some type of service from that, whether that be a school or a library or whatever type of general government facility. Our tagline in Loudoun is called Where Tradition Meets Innovation. And I think as we walk through some of these slides, you'll see that we're dealing with the traditional issues of growth management, but we apply some innovation in how we deal with at least the cash proffer aspect of things. So if you look at page 2, you can see, and Mike made mention of this particular packet being prepared last fall. It references current balances of cash, what's encumbered in our CIP, and what is unencumbered. And at that time, we were at about 3/4 of the cash balances being encumbered, meaning they are identified and set aside for particular public projects. As we've moved on from this number, which was back in November, and we got into our budget process, we're approximately at the $104 million mark of what we have in terms of current cash balances, and are encumbered in the CIP because we have cycled through and appropriated that money to projects is down to about 61 million. So what is unencumbered, and that's our first quarter of 2013, is about 30-some million dollars. We have a plan in place to be able to evaluate what opportunities do we have for particular public facilities to spend down those balances. So we are always monitoring that. Andrew mentioned the Commission on Local Government, the legislation that required the annual auditing. We provide that audit every year. We respond to it in terms of revenues and expenditures. We also take that one step further and report to our board quarterly on what our cash proffer balances are and how we draw those down, what opportunities exist for directing that cash to particular projects. With that dollar amount in mind, I'd like to also now move on to the next slide, which is dealing with our growth. And we at times have been referred to as the fastest growing jurisdiction in the nation, and we always are pointed to as perhaps the poster child for growth and development nationwide. Certainly in the Commonwealth, we are a forerunner, but as you all know, we're not alone in the issues of increased population growth management. Our growth has exceeded state and national averages for new residential building permits issued. We have a slide in there that talks about the number of units, and I think you will find that somewhat remarkable with the number that we see. Our average is 4,000 new units, new building permits. That's not a building permit for a deck or a shed, it's for a new unit since 2001. When we prepared this in 2012, we were anticipating somehow clipping the 3,000 mark. Our actual 2012 number was 3,719. This next slide on page 4, you get a flavor for the calendar years and the number of permits that we have issued. If you look into some of those high numbers over on the far right, the mid-sixes, and that's 6,000 residential units per year is what we experienced in 2003 and 2004 in that time frame. You can see, as in probably every jurisdiction nationwide subject to the downturn in economy, our numbers came down as we got towards the end of the decade. Our lowest was just under 2,000. However, that is still, in a time of great economic challenge, 2,000 new units coming online in a calendar year. For 11, you could see we were upticking just under 3,000. For 12, we finished, as I said, the 3,700 range. For 13 to date, with data through April, we are at 1,798 units. At that rate, we may beat that 2012 number. So we have quite a bit of activity in Loudoun, and we have folks moving in every day. The next slide, page 5, is another view of that. And you can see, obviously how we tipped the scales there in the early part of the last decade, came back down, and it looks like we're on the upswing. Next slide, dealing with population growth. According to the Weldon Cooper Center, in that period from 2000 to 2010, while the state's population increased 13%, our population increased 84%. Somebody like me who deals daily with responding to the challenges of local government, that is staggering. But we do it, and hopefully as we move forward this presentation, you'll see one way that we manage it. Prince William, our neighbor to the south, has had the next closest increase. Those of you from the Prince William area know that, and you were at 23%. The next slide on page 7 gives you another view of that population growth. And our population numbers in 1990, I think we're in about the 86,000 range. This chart is starting at 2001. You can see that's almost a doubling from 90 to 2000, and then continuously increasing as you move through the decade. Our population now is estimated at 339,000. That's our estimate for 13. Just wanted to annualize those numbers for you, and maybe you can relate them yourselves as you're looking at this information to the type of growth you've had in your jurisdictions elsewhere. But that difference, just looking at 11, working back to 2001, 131,000 people added in that time frame. If you annualize that, that's about 13,000 a year. If you took it by month, you're about 1,000 people per month. If you took it by day, it's about 36 people a day. So you head off to work in the morning and you come home at night, you've added 36 more people to your population, no matter what you do. Again, some attributes of our population growth that we deal with on the next slide. Our population growth, again, about 84% over that decade of 2000 to 2010. Natural increase, 23%. Percentage migration, 61%. So we have a lot of people moving in, but also our demographic is such that our population is generally young in their working years and also in their childbearing years. And so we've got the at-place working population. We are a jurisdiction with a very high median income. In fact, we've taken the #1 spot a number of years for jurisdictions with greater than 65,000 population. We're usually up there #1 or #2. But we also have folks that are raising families, and in a couple slides you'll get the picture of what that means in terms of public school children. If there's anybody here from Madison County, on that next slide on page 9, no intention to offend, but your population at about 13,000 souls That's about what we grow every year. If there's somebody here from the city of Fredericksburg, your population is about 26 or 27,000, and we add your population of your city every 2 years to our county. Obviously, this number of people that are moving in causes a increasing burden, a large burden on providing public facilities. Not only the amount, but the frequency with which you must add those new facilities. And I'll get into that a little bit later. Facility development needed to occur before cash proffer contributions can accumulate. You can imagine if you are approving a project and it has a per unit cash contribution involved, and say there's 300 units or 400 or 12 or 26, whatever the number is, and you assign a per unit charge, which would be received via the proffer process in accordance with the powers that the General Assembly has so enabled us with. But that balance doesn't accrue to the amount you need to write a check for a school or for a library for quite a period of time. In fact, not just from that one development, it's going to take a lot of developments to accrue a cash balance for you to write a check for any number of facilities. If you move on to page 10, you get an idea, if you will, just look at that for a second. County facilities built since 2001. And we say the type of facility, we say the number of facilities, and we say their locations. And I think you will all get quite the impression here of that's a lot of facilities. Some jurisdictions throughout the nation don't have this many facilities all told that they have to own, operate, manage to provide local government services. These are just the number that we have added since 2001. And I'll get into schools. You can see down there at the bottom, you can imagine adding 34 schools. There's more to come. In terms of our schools, I just wanted to take a second and let you know that for our elementary school, we're looking at a student capacity of about 875 to 900 kids. And we're looking for about 20 acres in which to build a new elementary school. For a middle school, a little bit bigger in terms of acreage, 35 acres would be what we'd generally be looking for, and that would house probably about 1,300 to 1,400 middle school students. For a high school, a little bit bigger, you can imagine, 75 acres is our rule of thumb, and the student capacity is about 1,800 kids. The cost of those in elementary school, we generally budget in the $30 million range. Middle school about 40 million, high school about 80 million. We have one in the northern end of the county that is under construction right now, very challenging land site, and it'll probably be about 100 million when we're all through. If we didn't acquire the land via the proffer process, we're like anybody else. We're going out to the market to buy what the market brings to us in order to build a school, in order to send kids to school. The next slide I think might take you aback a little bit if you look at number 11. Look at that increase in school-age population that we have had from 01 through 12. Again, our demographic is in the childbearing years, and while the permits were down, as you saw earlier in that late 09-10 time frame, though that in-place population that may have been there for 5 or 6 years, they start sending their kids to kindergarten. Every year we have a new net number of students, about 2,500. That's net new, not taking away the 12th graders who graduated and the incoming kindergartners. Net new, 2,500 generally is what we see. That might be tapering off a little bit as we move forward, but that's what we've been dealing with for quite a few years. Schools, the next slide, I want to spend a minute on that. If you can imagine in your jurisdiction, or any jurisdiction for that matter throughout the nation, how many facilities in terms of schools have we opened? 19 elementary schools, 8 middle schools, 7 high schools. And as we look into our CIP for the years 14 through 18, more to come, 3 more elementary schools, 2 more middle schools, 3 more high schools. And in our 14 to 18 CIP, we even include additions to those schools that have been opened since 2001. So not only did we just add schools since 2001, unbelievably, we are adding additions to them also to deal with the increased student generation, the student population. Okay, now I'll move on to number 13, to really the meat of the matter, which is our capital facilities contribution. In Andrew's presentation, he did touch on the whole approach of cash proffers as allowed by the General Assembly, and certainly we employ that capability in Loudoun. They are voluntary proffers, no doubt about it. As an application is coming through, we will be evaluating it for how they comply with the policy guidance that we've laid out. Back in 2001, we developed policies for the proffer process that looked at what was the change between the existing zoning that the owner had in place right then and the delta of what they were asking for. How much more density were they asking for? And we applied a policy that the existing base density, whatever number of units you could get off there already before you added in your new rezoned units, that would be on the county's dime, for lack of a better way of saying it, that we would pick up that capital facility impact. So whatever you had today, you come in tomorrow and ask for rezoning, your capital facility guidelines are applied to your net new units. That's how we adopted our policies in 2001, and since that time we have evaluated rezonings along that basis. Generally, this helps offset the county's development of capital facilities and the increases that come with increased density of a rezoning. Again, these are voluntary. As I mentioned before, there's a bit of a lag time between when the capital facility contribution is made and when it can be spent. And you need to have time to accrue to sufficient balances, and you need time to actually work through that whole CIP planning process. It takes a number of years to be able to refine your forecasting, find sites if they weren't otherwise proffered, and get your program in place in the CIP. We have a CIP process that works on a 2-year basis, biennial approach, and we find ourselves every year we're looking at the CIP, we got to add new facilities, make adjustments where we can. Also, for those of you who have worked with the proffer process, you know that the commitments that are made in the agreements sometimes can be very, very, very specific. And the language governing those agreements, at the end of the day, they can be limiting to the jurisdiction. Your type of, your spendability, for lack of a better term, might be a little bit limited because A, they emanated from a particular rezoning case in a particular area, and they're supposed to be offsetting the need in that particular area. You may need to build a school over here, but that particular proffer over there might not be able to work for it. So it might not be able to be applied for that particular new use. So you are limited, and you need to manage the information. You need to be on top of it. We keep our zoning folks and our capital facility planners busy all day, every day, trying to figure it all out. This next slide on number 15 gives you a general idea of how we handle the process in Loudoun. We have a capital budget. We look at those proffer balances and figure out what could we spend from this particular pot of money from this particular application over here. Our zoning administrator issues a determination that the use of those funds would be appropriate for the use that we're asking for. And we also go back and notify folks who were affected by the area of the application, whether that could still be the owner. Most likely it's a property owners association. We tell them and we make sure they see that determination letter that a proffer from your from the application that rezoned your area is being used for this particular use. That's trying to be transparent and let folks know. That can also be appealed if somebody finds otherwise or feels somewhat aggrieved by that. Again, we're looking at the programs that we have from the various agencies throughout the county to see what capital facility is needed and what balance might be applied to their particular use. We bring that to the Finance Committee of the Board of Supervisors, and they have quite a review, and you can imagine sometimes those discussions get parochial. I want this over here, I want that over there in my district. You can't have that over there in your district because we only have enough money to have one. You're going to have to decide and fight it out, and that obviously happens everywhere, but it is subject to debate. And at the end of it, within our budget process, in our adopted CIP, we also have a board action on our proffer fund saying these funds will be applied to these projects and here's where they fit in the CIP. Now, we at times have heard the criticism of where in the world did you get those per unit capital facility charges? Did you dream it up, or did somebody magically drop a formula on your chair? What we use is a stakeholder process, and it's referred to as our Fiscal Impact Committee. The board appoints these people, and they consist of folks that are in the development business that either have had applications go through the process or have something that they're looking at in terms of a development project, but they're from the development arena. And various interest groups in our county that we have the Piedmont Environmental Group, who has been involved in monitoring growth issues for a number of years. We have the schools and staff from the school planning side, who's obviously at the table and participating in these discussions in quite a level of detail. And then the rest of the group is really made up by citizens that express an interest and want to be appointed to this. What they are looking at is a full range of public services that are anticipated, expected to be provided in the community. We sometimes refer to that as a marketplace basket of public service goods to be delivered. And that could be schools, it could be parks, it could be fire and rescue, it could be general government, which is office space for all of us that need to do this type of work, libraries. Some funny things that have come up is that there have been some interest groups that have felt that a dog park needs to be a public facility and you need to calculate for that. We have not included that type of thing, but that type of subject provides for a lively debate. Years ago, there was a interest group that wanted to promote archery uses, and so an archery range as part of our park should be included in our capital facility goods. That didn't withstand debate either. Generally, these are things that the folks that move into the county are looking for. They're looking to take their kids to the library. They're looking to drop their kid off at school. There's an expectation and a demand for educational facilities. They're looking for places to go to the park. They are looking for playing fields. We have again, young population with school-age kids, and the demand for playing fields is through the roof. Every day we deal with those types of challenges. So this particular group sets the standards for what those capital facilities will be, and they assign the relative costs, and then they factor down the math to a per unit impact. And that's where it comes from. Those facility guidelines are presented to the board, the formula for developing the capital intensity factor, which is that per unit contribution. I'll talk a little bit about it on the next slide. That comes from our Fiscal Impact Committee. And by collaboration and by engaging those stakeholders for their input, what's a better way to do it, what does the community expect, that's how that is arrived at. If you look at the next slide, you can see the cost range, and this is a little bit of, I believe, innovation on the part of the county. There is a range of those per unit cost, from the very least expensive multifamily, again per unit, to the largest charge of single family, up to $59,000. Well, you know, when you travel around the state and you hear $59,000 per unit, folks want to come up to me and say, Charles, how can that be? How can you do that, and how can the building industry be expected to absorb that? And what are you doing to promote affordable housing with a number like that tacked on? Well, I'll tell you, these ranges, the fact that you see ranges, they're assigned to various geographies in the county. As our county has developed on the eastern end, we have been providing these schools and public services and parks and libraries. And in some areas of the county where there's still development potential, there is a good network of public facilities already existing in place. So we have applied a sliding scale, if you will. If you're in an area where you already have public facilities, then you're not expected to pay the full freight of the per unit charge. If you're in an area in the county where the public facilities are a little bit slim because the development is rather young and these things haven't come to fruition, and I live in one of those areas of the county, and I have a junior in high school, just this past year, we've been able to open up a library in that area of the county. Before that, there was no library for all these kids that were moving into this particular area of the county. So in an area like that, you'd expect the capital facility to be pursuant to that higher number, because there's a lack of facilities that have been built to date. So you have a sliding scale, ratcheted approach. In terms of exemptions, this is where I want to get into trying to level the playing field and the approach that we have used. Base density means, as I was saying before, just those units that you already have the right to build. We have an example here a little bit later, which you'll be able to see the arithmetic, but whatever that ground could have generated by right before you asked for your rezoning, take that number off, and you're not expected to provide that capital facility charge. We also do not apply these to any of our affordable dwelling units. So the notion of tacking it on to all units that are proposed by the development and exacerbating an affordable housing issue, we don't. We try to, we slice off that number and say it's your market rate units that that we're looking for that contribution on. We also look at anything unique to the development application that may be an in-kind proffer or some dedication of land. A lot of the larger projects do include public site dedications. We learned the hard way that if you say elementary school, but you find out that the school's evaluated the student demographic and it needs to be a middle school, you need to go back through the whole process and amend that. So we say public use site, and it could be a variety of things that you could end up with, including a public school. So we learned that kind of thing along the way. Also, all of this, interestingly, is not dealing with transportation. It's not including a percentage contribution for roads. That's just capital facilities. However, if you come in and you are providing a regional road improvement, you are going beyond what you needed for your own application. And a lot of times we have issues of connectivity in the county. If you're from high growth jurisdictions, you know that the road got so far down there, but the last half a mile is missing. And here comes somebody over here. Are you going to help me on that road? I'd love to. We deduct the cost of that regional road improvement from the capital facilities contribution. And so this is subject to discussion and evaluation through the rezoning process, but I wanted to make it clear that we certainly have quite a bit of exclusions, and it's not applied to every single unit. You can see this hypothetical that starts on slide 19. Here's something in the Ashburn area of the county, which is central area, high growth area. 3,000 units proposed, 1,000 single family detached, 1,000 single family attached or townhouses, and 1,000 multifamily. The base density that's allowed prior to rezoning is 1 unit per acre. The next slide on page 20, you can see how the arithmetic works out. And you can see just from that 3,000 dwelling unit application what that does to our population numbers and some of those population dynamics I mentioned earlier. There's a population per unit. If you look at the single family, about 3.2 people per unit. If you look at townhouse, about 2.75. And you can also see the school-age children that come from those units. And so that's generally what we're talking about when you break down the numbers and you look at it on a per unit basis. Going on to page 21, slide 21, the 300 base units, they would be excluded from paying capital facility contributions. The 313 affordable dwelling units, they would be exempt from providing capital facility contributions. And they would also get some type of credit based on a school site that they might dedicate. You can see in this case there's a 20-acre parcel and the approximate value is about $500,000 per acre. We would take that value and we would subtract that from the match. You can see, taking it another notch, what someone would pay before these exemptions, and then what the non-exempt housing units, what that burden would be, and the difference of the $123 million down at the bottom of the page to the $71 million. That's just working through the details the way we handle it. So we look at what people are providing by application. We don't charge it to affordable dwelling units. We don't apply it to base density. And those are big considerations. There's also an opportunity to reduce the number even further depending on the type of transportation improvements that are provided. And you can see slide 23 just sort of enumerates that. 24, you can see our the evolution of what we've seen in terms of per unit capital facility contributions in terms of their value. And then 25, I think, is pretty telling in that all of that exercise and all that we need to provide in our CIP proffers are a very small percentage. And that could be anywhere from 2%, 3%, always under 5%. So these mechanisms that we use are a tool that the General Assembly has provided to us. And we do take advantage of it and apply it based on what we are allowed to do. But overall, the offsetting impact of the total amount of proffers, if you look at your CIP, it's usually a very small percentage. I also wanted to say that what we've been able to do in Loudoun is acknowledge that there's a need for these capital facilities. There's also a need at the same time for transportation facilities. And in a proffered application, we would get a wide range of transportation improvements, some wonderfully offsetting and great to add to the network, and some not so great, depending on how it all wound up after the application was reviewed. But now we will take full advantage of what the General Assembly has offered this past year with the additional tax revenues under the heading of the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, and what would be available regionally and what would be available locally. And I think that will help us an awful lot. This year, our board dedicated 2 cents of the tax rate to transportation to fund locally on their own initiative, which we'll take full advantage of, and we're rolling out transportation projects in the CIP. But I just wanted you to realize that we have that burden of the local road network to deal with all the traffic that comes with it, all these things I've mentioned, but these proffer formulas are really dealing only with capital facilities, and they don't include a formulaic amount for transportation impact. We usually handle that separately. So with that, any questions for me, I'm glad to answer them.